Hello everyone, Cape Town, how's everybody doing? It's a very, very subdued group of people after lunch. I hope lunch was great, and we're going to get underway. So my name's Tite. I'm the CTO of Cloudicode, a small consultancy in Durban, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about growing an apprenticeship, why we did it, where we came from, and some of the thinking behind what we've done. So I'm actually filling in for somebody who didn't get a visa or couldn't get his visa, so you may be in the wrong talk. So this is the talk outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about how and why we started, what was the approach, some of the content, what work experience we do, what projects we do, how we grow some of our leaders, some of our apprentice stories, and then what we learned along the way as we went. All right. So if you've ever heard me talk at DevConf, you'll remember that I normally give out beers. When Robert phoned me on Thursday to say, could you do a talk at DevConf, I didn't have any beers. I was already in Cape Town. But I do have, normally what I do is give out a beer for an interesting question. I've got some chocolates that we'll throw out for some interesting questions. So towards the end, or as we go along, ask some questions. Put up your hand. Happy for this to be completely interactive as we go along. So where did this thing all start? We know we've got the same problem. Everybody has this issue. Where do we find good people? How do we grow good people? So this started over a coffee with one of my senior developers, and we had this real problem. How do we get people into our organization and get them consistent in our organization? So we devised this idea of a boot camp. And boot camp was part of everybody's induction inside the company to be able to get everybody moving in the same direction. And very quickly, boot camp turned into an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship was because we wanted, instead of going to find people, enticing them to come into our company, we would do that, plus we would also grow young people and keep them inside our company. And we've managed to keep a large number of those people, and they've grown successfully through our organization. So before we get started on where we were going with our apprentice, there were some things that we needed to do. We needed to talk to the youth. We needed to understand what it is that they're actually looking for. And these are the things they're looking for. They're looking for valuable work. They don't want to be put into a box or put into the lower ground floor to do some weird-ass project. They actually want to do proper work. They want to work with proper teams. They want to get valuable work experience. They want to get paid an equitable salary, the salary that they come out with. And they want to learn and they want to grow. Our youth are incredibly passionate and incredibly ready to learn and grow. They just need people to show them how to do it. I once had a junior developer sitting on my team one day, and I was talking her through very, very softly and very slowly through a piece of work. And she turned to me and she said to me, Chris, I don't need you to baby me. If I need help, I'm going to come and help. I'll come and ask you for help. And that's the general trend of what I find with these young developers as we go along. So before I start talking about our approach and all the different experiments that we did, this is the philosophy that we have in the company. You've seen it before. It's this old trope around the apprentice, journeyman, craftsman, master craftsman, foreman. And this is the idea of how we've started to approach learning in our organization. We start bringing somebody in as an apprentice, taking them along a journey, and getting into a craftsman's position. And in our organization, we've actually pegged craftsmen at the developer D1 level. So we've gone and said, in order to become an accredited person in our organization, we look at you becoming D1. There's a whole lot of things around that. Can you build a system from the ground up? Can you think about security? Can you think about observability? Can you think about how your product is going to be deployed? Can you think about how your product is going to be maintained? That becomes the baseline by which we accredit all of our developers. And from there, we move backwards into the journeyman route, into our apprenticeship, and define our workload and our learning by moving backwards from the developer into the apprentice range. So that's the very first pattern that I think is important for you to take into account when you start looking at this, because this is a very important pattern that's going to come to light as I talk to you. There's going to be some interesting challenges that come about when you have an apprenticeship program. And being prepared and by thinking things forward is something that you're going to need to take into account. So what did our first iteration look like? It was incredibly empty. It had some fundamental parts to it. Every time we take on somebody new, we needed to put them through an induction. Come into the company, what does it look like? How do you work? All those types of things. We've also included an aspect of testing, and you'll see this becomes a very important pivot point inside our organization, in fact, inside the apprenticeship, is to focus on testing. So quality is an important aspect. Being able to write a test case, know what bounds checking are. I mean, guys that are coming out of university at the moment are not really encouraged to think about how to test their software. So we've focused on trying to get people to learn how to write a test case, think about their testing, think about their quality of their code, think about everything that comes in to what is actually going to be able to be released. And then we started up our development bootcamp. So what do we cover in the development bootcamp? We start off with an introduction to unit testing. Again, testing is a very important aspect of what we do. So we have an introduction to unit testing. And we do this by giving young developers carters to work through. So you work through these carters with a coach who now starts drumming good coding practices into you. Dry, damp. We haven't, at this point, we hadn't included anything more advanced, but just the simple concepts on how to name things properly, how to make readable code, how to make algorithms work more effectively. Just trying to think, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. The other thing that we start putting into them through is how to use source code control. Be super surprised how many guys coming out of university have never used source code control. So we've got some source code control. We're walking through being able to be a developer. So now what we're doing is really just preparing them for their experience of working, of getting onto a team and getting some work experience. And within the next 2-3 months, we've popped them onto some work experience. Actual working teams, working with actual pieces of work, working with developers that work from day to day. We'll talk a little bit more about this. And at the same time that they get onto their work experience, they actually get a project to do inside the organization. We're going to take a look at some of those projects. What do they look like? What is the composition of the project? How we've structured them and where they go. So that's iteration 1. We did this iteration 6-7 years ago. And as we've walked through this, I'm going to walk you through the generation of our iteration we move forward. Iteration 2, things start to get a little bit more interesting. Induction starts to get a little bit more formalized. And you'll, when you start to see the timeline of how we did this, it'll start to make sense why the induction starts getting informalized. We've still got introduction to testing, but we're building that out a little bit. We're putting a little bit more concepts into testing. Development Bootcamp really hasn't changed that much. All we've done is focus on the coaches. How do they convey what needs to be done? We've worked very hard with our coaches to get them going. But we start to add some new elements into our apprenticeship. We start to add in professional practices. How do you conduct yourself in a meeting? How do you communicate at stand-up? How do you communicate at retros? All of those ways. How do you write an email? Email etiquette. Those are the concepts that we start bringing in to our young professionals. We start to bring in agile processes. So in our experience of working with the youngsters, we were just saying, well, you can learn agile by getting on a team. So you could learn it by day-to-day experience. But we found that they really didn't grok what was actually happening. Things weren't settling correctly. So we brought in this idea of putting an agile practices process in place. So we'll teach you how to do Scrum in some little workshops. We'll show you how the board works. We'll talk to you a little bit about retro. We'll talk about stand-up. We'll bring in the concepts of Kanban. We bring Kanban in a little bit later, but we start to bring in the agile processes. So people, when they move on to work experience, have a heads up around what's actually happening and how you're supposed to conduct yourself and what we're expecting of you in a Scrum and more agile team. We've also started to include a BA bootcamp. So it's a little bit lightweight at the moment. Started to understand how specifications are put together. Start to bring in agile BA concepts like personas, and how do we start doing a little bits of prototypes, and why is that important? Why is UX important? What are those aspects? And these are elements that people are not learning at university. So you can start to see how we're rounding out what the developers are supposed to start knowing. So we've got our BA bootcamp, and we start throwing them onto teams, and they start working through their team experience and back onto their projects. Again, we'll talk about their projects. Then we move on to iteration 3. So it's now starting to build out. We're starting to get a lot more confidence in here. This is probably 3 to 4 years into this experiment. And remember, you can only do this experiment once a year. So you've got to make these small changes and small changes as you go. So if you are going to start out with an apprenticeship program, my suggestion is to start small. As you see, we started small. We focused on the most important aspects. We focused on being a developer. The quality is a very important aspect to us. And we listened to what our audience told us they needed. They needed work experience. They needed project experience. But we needed them to be ready to get onto a project. So the boot camp was the most important aspect. As you can start to see now, the boot camp is starting to become a lot more rounded. This is a 3-month period that they're with us, a very intense period. They haven't moved on. Moving on to work experience only happens after about a 3 to 4 month period. So they're spending time with the coaches day in, day out, walking through these aspects. Again, introduction to testing. This part is starting to get a little bit more detailed. At this point, and we'll talk about this in the timeline, we start adding testers as actual elements into our bootcamp. So it starts building out a little bit more. Development bootcamp starts to become a lot more involved. We start putting in separation of concern concepts. We start bringing in dependency injection. We start bringing in concepts that are a little bit more important for the guys just to carry a working knowledge on. We start bringing in patterns like the factory pattern, the singleton pattern. Just start introducing the guys to these ideas, taking our carters and manipulating them so that we can start bringing these patterns into place. And in this iteration is the first iteration of us bringing in automated testing. So automated testing is being important. Inside this automated testing bootcamp, we start to lay down the fundamentals of HTML. We start to lay down the fundamentals of CSS. And I know it sounds a bit weird. Why aren't you doing that in development bootcamp? Development bootcamp for us has really just been the fundamental foundation of what you're actually building. The automated testing is where we can start introducing concepts like HTML and CSS because we're using tools like Cypress to be able to automate test our elements. We also start bringing in APIs at this particular point, so we can start bringing in Postman. We start bringing in the concepts around APIs. You'd be surprised how many university students come out and have no idea what a get post is. It is frightening. I interview these guys every single year. I've been on the interview panel, and it's very scary where our education system lies at the moment. I think this is also another important reason as to why we need more people building out apprenticeships internally inside their companies to build up and fill in the gaps that the universities are not able to cover at the moment. So professional practices is getting a little bit more, it's getting a little bit wider. We're starting to bring in guest speakers. We're starting to find people in the industry who are willing to come in and talk to our people. This is really just, you meet somebody at a conference and they've got an interesting talk, and so you bring them in to have a conversation. So professional practices is now starting to become a little bit more detailed. Agile practices is now where we're starting to add Kanban in. We're starting to build out a little bit more. We're learning more about what people don't understand and what they do understand, and we're refining this process and putting these items in. BA Bootcamp is now starting with some tools. They start to do their own little prototypes. They start to look at prototypes. Let's just leave it at that. And the very first time we start bringing in DevOps. So they've always had this slant of DevOps. It was something that we pushed on their projects. Like, you need to think about the release process. You need to think about the release cycle. But we start bringing in it a little bit earlier so that people start getting a concept of what's happening with DevOps. Where does DevOps fit? What's important to the organization? The work experience is still pretty much the same, and the project largely untouched. These are the cornerstones of what we've done. The development bootcamp, the testing introduction, the work experience, and the project are the cornerstones of what we're working through. And this is where we are right now. This is our current iteration. This is this year's iteration. And what we've done is you'll see professional practices and agile processes have moved all the way up. Our inductions got incredibly involved. I don't know if you noticed some of the pictures. We've got little boxes, we've got little welcome packs. People are, there's a lot of hype about it. People in the company are getting excited about the new inductees coming in. This year we took on 15 or 17 new inductees, all with their little boxes. Everybody in the company is there to welcome them, making a big fuss about getting people into the organization. We've moved professional practices all the way up, so it's now part of your induction. You're spending time working with the chaps. Some of the guest speakers are coming in. Agile practices is all the way up in the front. The reason for doing this is because we're starting to contract parts of our boot camp. If you have a look at this, it's laid in a particular way. So the first layer below Let's Go, the induction, professional practices, and agile practices is all part of our induction now. It's a week's worth of induction, and we're trying to get people into the idea of what works best. A lot of this is taken from feedback from our youngsters that are telling us, we prefer to know this before we want to know that. Again, just iterate, build, and iterate and build is the approach that we've taken. Testing is pretty much solid now. We've got our testers are in place. They know exactly what they need to work on. I'll talk a little bit about the coaches and how we grow those coaches in a little moment. Automated testing is now getting a little bit bigger. There's a few more tools that we've started to add. We've now moved the work experience earlier. Well, it's not actually earlier. We've actually moved out some of those more advanced topics out later. So we have an induction at the top. Then we have the core, which has always been testing, development, and then auto test. So that's been our core boot camp, and that's where we focus for the first 3 months. We get people onto their work experience, and then we are moving people onto their project at pretty much the similar time that they start their work experience. And then later in the year, BA Bootcamp starts to come in because we start to realize that the developers didn't necessarily need to know so much about BA that we were pushing up front. DevOps Bootcamp, DevOps Introduction has now actually turned to a bootcamp. So they're learning how to script. They're learning how build servers work. They're learning how containers work. They're starting to understand the fundamentals of what's actually taking place under the hood. And for the very first time, and this is the first time we're doing it this year, SecOps becomes a primary focus. And so we now have a core, and then we have what we call advanced boot camps, which would be the BA, the DevOps, and the SecOps. SecOps is starting to talk a little bit about GDPR. It's starting to talk about POPI. It's all of those elements that young people do not understand. Our company does a lot of work in the finance industry, and knowing information, knowing what to keep and not to keep, and what happens with data breaches. They start learning about cross-site scripting attacks. They start learning about SQL injection attacks. They start learning about the tools that they can actually use. They have a workshop for a day and a half on using Burp Suite to figure out certain things. So it's bringing the technology to them so that they understand what's actually happening. So that's the evolution of where we are right now. Induction, core, advanced. All right, and if anybody is going to take anything away from what I've presented to you now, it's lay down your solid foundation and build it and iterate and build and iterate as you move on. So this has become a core element in our approach. For us, anybody working on our teams needs to focus on quality, and so all of our apprentices start in some element of test. Why is test important? First off, when you're working on a team, and you'll learn very quickly in the next slide that we like people to live on the team for a 12-month period. So they're going, well, not 12 months, but I mean they live on the team for at least 9 months. They're going to be part of that team. So moving into test gives them the very first and the fastest way to learn the domain. Because anything that you need around your developers to learn the domain. So getting them into test is learning the domain. Getting them into test is starting to look at some of the code, starting to feel out some of the code. They're starting to understand, and it's gradually bringing them into the working experience. Also, what we have found is that people grow at different rates. Sometimes somebody needs to be in test for a little bit longer, and sometimes they never leave. Sometimes people want to be out of test as soon as possible. I've got a young apprentice on my apprenticeship program. At the moment, he's working on one of my teams. He was in test for about 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe, and he's already into dev, and he's already doing positive commits. But his compatriot, who's on the same team with him, has said to me, listen, I just want to get more. I just want to feel a little bit more comfortable before I make the transition into development. So starting with quality is important. But don't make the mistake that other companies make and keep people to live and die in quality. That is probably the worst anti-pattern. Quality is great, but make sure you're moving people at the rate that they need to move. What's also important to note is that every single person in our organization has started at test. So the developers start at test and they go into auto test, and they either stay as auto test, go into developer, or move into DevOps. And our BAs, PMs, and test analysts go in and start as functional test and move in. So that's a fundamental aspect of what we've brought through in our apprenticeship. And we found that our apprentices appreciate, once you start explaining to them the importance of doing this, they start appreciating where they're going. Young developers, putting them onto auto test, you start riding out all the problems that they have, as long as you're reviewing their code and you're checking on them regularly. Let's talk a little bit about the work experience. So work experience has to be real. You have to get them onto actual working projects. It's the fastest way for people to grow. The most important aspect that we've learned is to keep them on those projects. Don't move them around all the time, because these are young people. They're trying to learn elements. They're just in the working environment for the first time. Take it slowly. Prepare them for getting into a working experience. As you've seen, we needed to prepare them to make stand-ups. We needed to prepare them to be able to communicate correctly. We needed to be able to prepare them to be able to test and be able to do some kind of development. You can't just bring them straight out of university and throw them into a project and expect them to do it. There are a couple, but those are what we call unicorns. They don't exist in most of the university candidates that we see coming out at the moment. The other important aspect of work experience is that they learn to conduct themselves in a particular fashion. They learn to be able to communicate. They learn to be able to be part of a team. They learn to be able to work with people that are much older than them. And it builds up a certain sense of confidence. You will not believe the young developers walking in on the first day feeling absolutely petrified to be able to join a development team. And in the year that they've moved out, they are completely different people. So what is this project that I've been talking about? In our organization, we're a consultancy, so we expect our developers to have some experience in a full-stack development. So we give them a full-stack project. Now, you don't have to have a full-stack project. If you're a games development house, well, then give them a games development project. Shape your project around what they do. But what we have identified is that young people coming out of university do not know the fundamental layers in a software architecture. They don't understand APIs, they don't understand ORMs, they don't understand UIs properly, and when you take them and put them onto an enterprise team, that thinking's all been done for them. They have no idea how to debug, they have no idea where things are breaking, because they've never been adequately prepared. So the project that they get is to build a vertical problem. It's a single table, it's a simple API, using whatever framework technology. We use .NET Core because it's simpler to get into, build out a REST API, put some gets, posts, puts, deletes, build out a neat API, build out a neat UI. They get to choose the UI technology. They get to choose the database technology. It has to be relational, though, but they don't get to choose certain elements of what we're trying to do. So they have to use Dapper, for example, and I have my reasons. We can debate that as we go. They also have to get unit tests in. They have to use integration tests, and they build this entire application. This application actually has a life after their apprenticeship. It stays with you inside the organization. So as you move as a journeyman through our organization, this app stays with you until you get to D1. D1, this app looks completely different. It's got many tables, it's got security baked into it, it's got a whole release process, it's got observability baked into it, because that's the part that they're learning to use. We do that for a reason. Young people sometimes grow faster than others, and you've got to be able to get them to this point and get them further. I have a young guy who started our apprenticeship 18 months ago, and he's developed a D1 already. Incredibly bright guy. Knocked this thing out of the park in the first 3 months. But I have young people who just scrape by getting it in the 6-month or 9-month period that we get them to do it, because there's a lot of work. Remember, they're doing this in parallel with their work experience as well. They need to learn time management. They need to figure out how to get these elements done. You can also change it up. We've changed it up now for some of our clients. This is a cloud-based element. So bring in the technology that you need to bring in, but your coaches start teaching elements of how to think about a problem, how to break a problem. Do you start at the outside? Do you start at the inside? Or do you start building out at the API? There's a whole lot of challenges that your coaches can give them that gives them this idea to start thinking. When they're doing this full-stack application, they have a coach that works with them. The coach meets with them every 2 weeks. They have a backlog board of items that they need to take care of, and the coach will walk through, what did you do this time, where you're going the next time. It's pretty much an agile process of coaching young people. All right, so that's the project that we give them. If you don't finish the project, you don't graduate. If you don't graduate, we don't take you on. It's a little bit hard, but I've always said to the young people, they'll surprise themselves. I have yet to see somebody not finish this project. I've yet to see us not take somebody on. So what does our timeline look like? Just to give you an idea of where we're going. This is the iterate. This is the play with what we're doing. We started off with this boot camp idea, and boot camp is something that we bring onto our induction. Boot camp is now part of the core part of what we're doing. We bring our first apprentices on. We started with 2. We started with 2 young people. We didn't start with 5. We didn't start with 20. I see companies going, oh, we've got to do this thing, and we're going to bring 20 people on. It's like, guys, if you're not a learning institution, you're going to battle. So we start with 2. And our next iteration, which is, I think we did 2 again, our next iteration is to take 4. So we started to add a few more elements into this. We're still using iteration 1. We're just learning to figure out how are we walking this through. At this point, because we're a consultancy, some of our clients start getting involved. And so we start building people on behalf of our clients. I'm not saying that this is something that you guys may want to do. It's just something that we do because as a consultancy, we're always hustling. So we've now added, we're doing this on behalf of our clients. The next thing we do is we start upping the scope. So this is where iterations 2 starts coming in. We start thinking about professional practices. We start thinking about the BAs. We start thinking about the processes, the agile processes, and we build up to it. As our company grows, we start bringing in tester apprenticeships. So we've built out a testing department now. We're starting to bring in tester apprenticeships. I'm not getting into what they've done there, but because this is developer conference, but we've got testers involved in here. And you can see we've gone from 6, we've gone 2, 4, 6, we've gone to 8. It's now becoming a bit of a machine. This, at the time of us going to 8, every time we took on 8 people, it increased our company's size by 20%. Imagine taking 20% every year to keep going. So you can imagine that's how we just started taking it on slowly. And then we started to add in automated test. We needed to bring some automated tested items in there. We have a testing department now, so automated test starts to become something that's important. And the next iteration is to start bringing in some group activities. We start bringing in DevOps a little bit more. The group activities we found were very much fun. If we can, we prefer people to learn by themselves. We can put them under pressure, but if you have a group activity, they learn together with themselves, and we put that group activity just before they're about to go and start working in the great wide world. They get a very nasty project, which they have to finish in a crazy short space of time, and we just do that so that they figure out how to gel and how to work going forward. And now, here's where we are. This year, 15 apprentices. Our company was 45 at the beginning of the year, and 15 people arrived, and we're now at 60. And that's essentially what it is. We've included SecOps, and we're starting to now think about how we can prepare people for the cloud. All right, so the takeaway here is don't start too big. Start small. Start thinking about how to layer on what you're presenting to your young people. I want to talk very quickly about growing leaders, because part of this is how do we grow people, and then keep them inside the organization. In our organization, we have what we call the leadership growth path, and we start at day one with growing our leaders. You can't be a leader if you can't lead yourself. So you have to be able to maintain your time. You have to be able to maintain a good way of managing. So managing yourself is the most important aspect. We get people to come in and talk with them. The younger people, once they graduate from the apprenticeship, they become coaches inside the apprenticeship. So the process is a self-feeding process. So leading without authority is where we get young people to come in and start coaching young people because they're more advanced. So they sit on the coaching boot camps, they sit on the testing boot camps, they become actual coaches. And in this space, they are learning to be young leaders inside our organization. I'm not going to go into lead with authority because that's when more senior members come in, but you can see how you can retain people inside this organization by thinking about their growth path into leadership inside your organization. So let's quickly talk about some of the stories. I know this font is a little bit difficult, but it was a quick talk that we put together. I want to talk about Subject A. Subject A was a university graduate. This was my first graduate, and he spent time on my team. And what we realized very quickly about Subject A was that he was better at managing people and managing himself than he was traditionally at technical. Not bad technical, let's take no way about it. He finished the apprenticeship. He's a good technical person, but very good at managing people. And very quickly, we got him into learning how to manage people. He started coaching more people than anybody else. He started stretching himself in his leadership skills. He stayed on into the organization. This year, he is now leading a team and working through. He spent 5 years with us. He's growing with the organization and loving every minute of it. Subject B joined the organization in iteration 2 as a university graduate, but this chap was technically we couldn't keep him still. And this is one of the reasons why I say you have to plan ahead. You can't just have everybody doing the same in and out. You're going to get people who are technically advanced. They're going to run much faster and be prepared. So he leaned into his technical growth. He is actually now the boot camp coach for technical. So he's with the organization, and he's bringing his skill back into training young people. He stayed with the organization, and he's now a technical leader. And one of the most amazing stories is that Subject A is the team lead on the team that I've just been speaking about. And Subject B is the technical lead on that team. And that team is completely comprised of young apprentices. So we've got a whole success story of apprentice leaders with young apprentices that are leading young apprentices and knocking the socks off the clients that they're working with. Just takes a bit of time, takes a bit of effort. We'll talk a little bit about Subject C. Started our apprentice at iteration 2, also uni graduate. But apprentice 2 found that deving, just the deadlines and the constant moving, was just not what they were looking for. They found a really good home in auto testing. Loved coding, but loved testing, and really wasn't that keen on all the deadlines. Stayed in the organization, but is now nurturing the culture of automated test inside our organization. So you can see how you can re-engage your young people as you're moving through. So before we log out, let's talk about some of the lessons learned. First off, there's always hidden gems. You just have to look for them. It takes a little time, but you need to look for them. Secondly, the effects of the people, the lives of the changes that you're going to make of people's lives is incredible. I'll tell you a quick story. A young guy started my apprenticeship last year. I was really worried about him. He's always the class joker, always stuffing around. In the middle of the year, he turned. He just got hyper-focused. In the beginning of this year, him and I were talking, was towards the end of last year, him and I were talking. He said, listen, I need to be able to buy a car. What are we doing? I said, you need to get a good credit rating. This is where you listen to it, and went and sorted it out. Last week, he gives me a call and says, Chris, I'm going to get my car. But here's the heartbreaking story. He said to me, this is the first car that our family has ever owned. Those are the stories that make this a good story to tell. Those are the stories that we keep moving forward. And I want to encourage you to go out and find those stories for yourself, because those are the incredible stories. Things that you want to do is give people responsibility early. Don't hold back. Get them in and let them work in. But temper that responsibility. Make sure that they are prepared to take on that responsibility. It's your job to try and get them in to be able to take in that responsibility. Plan for faster growth. There are going to be people that get knocked this darn thing out of the park. Just plan for some growth. What I've also found in our organization is, and you'll see in the next slide, everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to be part of a success story. So once this thing starts gaining momentum, you're going to find that you get a lot of help, and it's good to get a lot of help. Always give feedback to your young people. Make sure that they know exactly where they're going, exactly how they're going, and take an interest in what they're doing and why they're there. They're part of your organization. You need to keep an open mind. Listen to the feedback that you're getting from people. There's only one reason why that iteration process actually got to the point where it is right now. And right now, it's actually a successful business model because we've actually started doing apprentices on behalf of our clients and on behalf of clients that were never our clients, but it was because we listened to the youngsters telling us where we need to go wrong. And the one thing I need to say about this, about apprenticeships, everybody says, I don't want to get into apprenticeships because people leave. They're going to leave. It's a reality. Just make sure they don't leave too soon. A year is too short. 2 years is nice. 3 years is perfect. If they leave you after 3 years, that's not a real problem. You've turned things around, and you will find that the more people know that you're investing in them, the more that they come to want to be part of your success story. We have 700 applicants last year for our apprenticeship program. That's how the news gets around. It only took 5 years, 6 years. Takes a while, but there we are. Last thing I want to lead you with is that you need to spread the load. So this is all of the coaches, everybody involved in coaching inside our organization, and there's only 4 people there that are being taught. So that's coaches for an entire year. Spread the load. Don't overload just one particular person. Every single one of those people is happy. I think I am right on time, but I'm going to just tell you one last story. People are craving, young people are craving this ability to learn. If you have a look at this photograph, there's one chap whose face, he's an incredibly shy person, but his face is not in this photograph. Didn't like to be photographed. I want to tell you a story about Jack. Jack knew he needed to actually figure out how to get to the next level. He spent 3 years working at SPAR to get his 1-year university fees. And he knew that if he knocked the socks off at university, he would get a bursary. And so he gambled to get a bursary and maintained that bursary for 3 years and then got onto our apprenticeship. He was the first person in his family to go through to university. Those are incredible stories. As I said, I encourage you to go out and find your own stories. And I'll leave you with this quote for the future. Thank you very much. All right. Anybody got some questions?
How do you turn the focus that you have at the moment on very young people into continuous growth and the whole developer experience and teaching the culture in your company? So when people come at different levels, how do you integrate them into that system?
Can I give you that? So I've got another talk that I did at DevConf a few years ago on agile learning and growth. Go and have a look at how we do that, but we essentially create a learning culture inside the organization. Every Friday we do learning time, and we get the coaches to learn how to coach each other, and we've got the entire organization coaching. And then we go out and find new learning material and just build up that thing. But I'm happy to talk about that in more detail if you want to catch me after this. Anybody else? There was another question. Jeez, there's a ton. Yep.
How do you make the learning fun?
How do you make the learning fun? I don't think we've got that right yet. But that's a damn good question. It's giving me something to think about. Thank you very much. I'm just thinking about that for a moment. Because learning isn't always fun. What we do is try and identify the different types of learners we have. So some people like reading, some people like practice, some people. So we have created groups inside the organization where we try and do groups together, try and do some concepts together. We've identified the styles in which people learn and try and encourage them to learn in the style that actually suits them. But we haven't made it as much fun as I think we could.
I find that there's that group of people that you teach and you focus on, because those people are already self-motivated. And those that aren't as motivated, aren't as driven to learn, and so making the content more engaging will make more success in those groups.
It's one of the reasons why you asked to build your own project and try and use the tech that excites you to be able to build that project. We don't spend a lot of time focusing on what that is. Once that thing gets wings, we encourage people to build whatever they like to build. All right, got a question at the back.
I heard a university a lot, but do you consider like students from or apprentices from like We Think Code or any kind of like code space like that?
Yeah, okay, good question. All right, so the only reason why we've started to focus on universities is because it's easier to trap those people. It's easier to go to universities and tell people about where we're going. At the moment, I'm going to tell you, I've just interviewed 4 people this year to start at my company. 2 of them are self-taught and like hitting the lights out. Somebody who started coding when he was 12, 21, still working at the organization. So we have a very big focus on trying to figure out how to find people that are not university graduates. Right now, it's just because it's an easier trap to use. But once you start getting going, there's some momentum. Where's the man?
So I have a question. Coming from non-corporate to corporate was a big jump for me initially in my early years, but now visiting a few smaller companies, working and build my skills up to a corporate environment. How do you motivate and inspire people to grow and to be the best that they can be in a dev role? Because I believe a good developer always stays curious and always want to learn. And how do you encourage to keep on learning?
So I think being able to give people the space to learn in the company has been important for us. Sorry, that's a great question. So being able to create the spaces in the organization. We have small projects that we build inside the organization, and so people always want to learn with more senior members of staff, and so we try and pair those individuals up. Our company tagline is learn, grow, deliver. We have a culture of learning in the organization. We have a culture of everybody is moving forward. We're always publishing. We're always getting in new books. We're always asking people to try and help us, learn this content. And if you make people part of the organization's learning culture, I found that it just starts moving. I do need to figure out how to make it more fun, though, because I do think learning can be a chore.
The goal is to push everyone to learn themselves and just continue that thing. People are going to burn themselves out. How do you identify when someone's going to just overload themselves and stop?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So our team leads are the most important aspect. We have a lot of feedback loops inside our organization. We run everything in a more agile kind of way. So our team leads are the first check-in. Like, how's the person doing? We also check, because we're a consultancy, we check timesheets. So we're looking to see, we ask you to log all your learning time. We ask you to log everything. So we're focusing on, where are you? Are you 160 hours a month? Are you 140? Are you 240? Where are you? And as soon as we start seeing those lines, we start hearing them early, and then we start getting people to go and take leave. Sometimes that leave is not annual leave. It's just unpaid leave because we know you've worked so hard. We have that advantage because for every hour worked, we can do that transaction. But we encourage people to take that time off and go and leave. And we try and plan that time off as well. So, for example, we've just had a series of different public holidays. I had a team that was working incredibly hard. I said to them, "You're going to take off time before and you're going to take time after, and go and spend time with your families, please." That was probably one of the biggest motivating factors to people getting one of their projects out. Not because I wanted to motivate them, I just wanted them to rest. But yeah, that's how we would do that. How much time do I have? Because I'm happy to answer as many darn questions, but I don't want the next person to... Sorry? Time out. Can I answer your question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you mostly focus on university graduates. Do you have any plans in the future to also consider matriculants? And then if you are, do you think you would need to start them at the same level as you would with university graduates?
No. We wouldn't start them at the same. We have considered, yes, but we wouldn't start them at the same level. There's a lot of more fundamentals that we have. We are running experiments at the moment with young people, so yeah.